So are we going in the right direction to grow our economy, create more jobs? I'm joined now by the Executive Director of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, Anne Bernstein. Thank you so much for joining us. Did you hear enough to give you confidence that our economy, yes, it's starting to recover, but that our economy can start to grow properly, to do the things we need to in South Africa?
Look, let me start by saying I thought the new Minister of Finance did well and made the right signals to the markets and investors as much as he could. He established that he was on the wavelength of the previous Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Reserve Bank, and I think that's important. The truth is that if you look at the budget projections for growth for next year and the year after, they're incredibly low, 1.6, 1.7%. This is totally insufficient and probably a realistic assessment of where we are. I don't think the budget policy statement is all about growth. It's about balancing our finances. And unless we get much, much higher growth going in South Africa, we're not going to be able to do that. So I am very worried about the state of the economy, and I don't think we're reforming strongly enough, fundamentally enough, and certainly not quickly enough. The President's recovery strategy was built on 3 pillars, essentially: infrastructure, power, and localization. Well, I'm not going to say anything about power. That's self-evident, and we're just not moving fast enough to create a market for new power coming onto South Africa's grid. In terms of infrastructure, you'll notice in the speech today, he talked about projects that had been unveiled, projects that have been gazetted. The fact is that we have had no new infrastructure project since 2018. And until you remove a whole lot of obstacles and bring the private sector in much more than we have, it's not going to happen. And localization is, in my view, and we'll be talking about this next week, the wrong policy for South Africa. It will raise costs in our economy, and it's effectively an anti-export strategy. So I am really concerned about the state of the economy and how we're going to bring our debt down and balance our budget, but because that is also an impediment to growth.
Yeah, I mean, the debt is just eye-watering. It's just so enormous. So there are some real concerns, as you've explained, around how we are going to grow. So what would you have liked to have heard? What could we be doing? What could we be considering that we perhaps are not?
Well, look at the list of reforms as one example. The issue of bringing skilled foreigners into South Africa is almost universally acknowledged as both cost-free, it won't cost us anything, and it would give us an enormous turbo boost to the economy. It wasn't even mentioned today. We got the critical skills list in February, March this year, and we haven't heard much since then. And anyway, that was, in my view, a totally inadequate approach to this challenge. So that's one example. But I think much more fundamentally, you have to ask yourself, how do we grow this economy when the state is almost totally broken? There are pockets of excellence, like the Treasury, but they're very few and far between. And we adopted a strategy in October last year, the President's recovery strategy, which is built on the state leading, the state kind of controlling all sorts of things. Well, as we all know, this state can't do that. So I think we need a very different approach to how we think about growth. We've got to free up markets as fast as possible. We need a sense of urgency, which always seems to be lacking in this government.
And, you know, he also mentioned the July unrest, and that, of course, just made a bad situation even worse in terms of investor willingness and interest, because South Africa, you know, those images were beamed across the world. We looked like a politically unstable country. And also, of course, you mentioned the power situation, which is really so crucial. You know, it's, as you say, I think it was a realistic budget, but there's not enough there to help us feel that we're on the right path. Do you think that we should be moving towards putting much more energy into growing more fruit and exporting it, for example, doing more to capitalize on the commodities boom? What are some of the practical things that you would like to see? You've mentioned infrastructure projects. Those need to happen much more quickly. But what else?
Well, look at the two areas of our economy that are growing well. Mining, which has given the country this enormous windfall in terms of tax revenue, thank goodness. But there's no new mining investment taking place because we have not yet created the right environment in which to attract new investors. The Minerals Council has been very clear on what is required in order to get billions and billions of new investment, but somehow we don't make progress. Take agriculture. We're doing fantastically. We're, I think, the second largest citrus exporter in the world at the moment. That's wonderful. It's, on the one hand, that industry, that sector of the economy is also not getting new investment because of the uncertainty about property rights and the amendment to the Constitution. That requires a decision. So here are two sectors that are doing well, but we're not getting new investment for the future because of the uncertainty of the policy environment. And of course, both of them are incredibly hampered by the failure of our state-owned enterprises, which either don't provide the logistics infrastructure that we need or do it partially but in a very expensive way. And we haven't really made tremendous progress. The minister talked about some reforms. These are good things, but they're all taking too long and they're not dramatic enough for us to grow. We've got to grow quickly, otherwise we're going to have more incidents like we had in July. And of course, it's important to point out that the terrible events of July, nobody seems to have been charged, no one significant, no ringleaders. So we have people who are armed and who are traitors, really, to the national cause, and not very much is happening. I don't feel as a citizen I know exactly what happened and who's going to pay, who's going to be put in court and charged for instigating those terrible events. We never seem to make progress.